We are recording. Okay, why we gather. We gather in community to deepen our sense of the meaningfulness of life, to shine light on the ideas with which we guide our choices, to give us courage to take the higher ethical path, and to get to know one another over time in appreciation of each one's unique and incomparable worth. I'd like to just announce a few items for the upcoming Sundays. On Sunday, January 17th, Jay will be leading us. He and I talked a little bit yesterday on thoughts of healing community. And so we will, I'm letting it open for Jay. Jay will do what Jay does best. Okay. And then on Sunday, January 24th, which is a fourth Sunday for us, in my head, I'm having this, working with some ideas on intentional community, not quite sure how what route that is going to be taking. I might even, Jay, try to get a hold of Elise. And maybe Elise did this wonderful YouTube video yesterday that just was like, spoke to me, and maybe, Elise would be agreeable to doing something with us next Sunday. But if she can't, I'll have something figured out. Okay. Our mission is, we are inspired by the ideal that the supreme aim of human life is to create a more just, equitable, diverse, sustainable, and compassionate society. We assist one another in developing ethical ideas and ideals, and to cultivate ethical behavior in the community around us. Our commitment is to honor the worth and dignity of every human being, and to treat each human being so as to bring out the best in them, and in so doing, bring out the best in ourselves. So with those words, we will, opening up today's program as what we call Living Ethics Conversation. And I think, I'd like to sort of set the tone, not saying that this is the tone that many of us, are in at this moment. But I found, throughout this week, my emotions ranged from here to here. And I realized that I wasn't being in my best self, holding the anger, the tension that Wednesday brought, I'm sure, to all of us. And in search of finding a way to uplift myself, and I hope it's something I'm going to share, and then it's going to be open to all of you to continue and the conversation this morning. I found a letter that was written by John Paul Literak, and I'm not pronouncing his last name correctly, Literak, but John Paul is a senior fellow at Humanity United and professor emeritus at the University of Notre Dame. And he offers his perspective on the events of this past week. John Paul has spent his life walking with people in many cultures through violent conflict towards transformative change. I'm not going to read in word for word what he said. I'm going to try and paraphrase some of this. He began his letter saying, the images of this past week remain seared in our minds. We are not looking at a fringe view. We are gazing upon ourselves. We are a deeply wounded nation. We know that our bodies are carrying the harm and that the deepest pain is always the one experienced closest to our home. He goes on by saying that he has noticed that across a wide and deeply divided political spectrum, most everyone seems to speak for and protect the Constitution, almost as if our shared document is a victim. He would like to offer that the deeper casualty lies with the loss of our basic social contract. We note its disappearance when toxic social dynamics spill into the mainstream of our collective life. Dehumanization replaces basic respect, blame supplants responsibility, and violence is justified over dialogue. We also know from settings of armed conflict and from our own exemplars in this country who never stopped building the more perfect union that is possible to reverse these dynamics. He continues then with Dr. Martin Luther King. He feels has captured this better than anyone. He consistently appealed to the guiding pillars that sustain the commitment to the social contract while pursuing long-sought change for equity and equality in the midst of deep division. Now, I have just a few more paragraphs, if you can bear with me, that he is sharing Dr. Martin Luther King's pillars. The first pillar referenced the deep soul's despair that waiting for change was no longer an option. The ploys and pragmatism of politics kept placing true equality just out of reach, deferred to the next election or into potential new legislative goals. Promises no longer sufficed. The sweltering summer, as he called it, could no longer accept the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. This temporal pillar required such immediate action, and act they did, and so must we, that he referred to it as the fierce urgency of now. Dr. Martin Luther King's second pillar constantly reminded people that the struggle for equality and dignity unfolds by way of a long and difficult pathway. So significant was this temporal challenge that, in his words, now etched on a national monument, the movement must hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. Hope requires patience and persistence, precisely because the arc of the moral universe is long, even as it bends toward justice. In the midst of the temporal tension playing out between the fierce now and the long arc, Dr. King's vision never wavered in this, the third pillar, the commitment to nonviolence and appreciation for our ultimate interdependence. Over and again, his imagination captured the understanding that while the past carries forward profound violation of dignity and the present continues to humiliate and divide, our future is shared. Calling this out in his I Have a Dream speech, he noted that across racial divides, their freedom is inextricably bound with our freedom, followed by the shortest single sentence in his speech, we cannot walk alone. These pillars offer the way forward into renewing our social contract and reversing toxic dynamics. Act on and walk into what you know to be true. We start local. We reach out beyond our comfort zone. We commit to nonviolence, and we always protect the dignity of others. Walk together in this, the stone of hope is hewn. So here we are. We've had feelings this week. We are trying to find the way to bring our ethical, humanist values into this space, into what we've all experienced this week. And as we figure out, as our community, as what I call, and you're going to hear me using this term a lot in the next several months, intentional community. That's what we are. Those of us sitting here this morning have committed yourself. Feel responsibility. Take ownership of what we have built here. And I'm going to now open it to you. So just unmute yourselves when you're ready, and let's use this space of time together this morning to share. Can even respond to what I read. How did it make you feel? What resonated with you in those words, John Paul? Rick, I heard a What would you like to share, Rick?
Well, earlier in this week, I listened to a talk by, I can't remember the fellow's name, that he's a person of color that reaches out to the KKK and stuff like that. I can't think of what his name is, but he had said something there, and I had posted his quote. I couldn't remember his name, so I couldn't attribute the quote, but it was, to fully forgive is to fully understand. And I'm having troubles trying to understand and wrap my head around it, and I claim to be, I try to better myself all the time, but a lot of my military and my decadent lifestyle before it creeps in, when these people were doing this, I didn't even know what was going on. I come home and I said to Sue, what the hell's going on? She said, they're storming the Capitol. I said, well, they should mow them down, and then I thought to myself, well, no, for somebody that claims to be anti-death penalty and stuff, that's pretty, but it was so confusing. And I'm sure what I'm saying is I'm trying to understand what drove these people to it, and then I use a little logic. Well, of course, the fairness doctrine definitely has a hell of a lot to do with it, and 30-40 years of hate radio, and Newt Gingrich's contract with America never compromised with the other side. We're looking at the high water mark of Reaganism now, but they're being manipulated by their Congress people, and look to Fred Keller. He knows damn well this has been a legitimate election, but he throws this division in that, and I mean, so how to fully understand, it's this. It's a little much for a plumber to wrap his head around, So, but I'm trying, I'm sure these people have grievances, but they bitch about when somebody burns down a damn Target, but but it's okay to storm a Capitol. I can't wrap my head around it, and I can't make any logic of it. What's the end game? What it's fascism, it's, nobody can see it. I don't know. That's what I gotta say. How are you gonna understand something that that just doesn't have any reason. That's what I'd like to know.
Thank you, Rick, for sharing those deep thoughts that you're having. Guy.
Yeah, I've been listening to a lot of false equivalencies and a lot of perpetuating of new lies. And I'm not so sure, Rick, that these people have a grievance. They've been lied to for a long time, and they've swallowed the lies. You know, the Black Lives Matter people, they actually have a grievance that's existed for hundreds of years. And when they pretend to make that there's some kind of false equivalency between what happened at the Capitol and these Black Lives Matter protests, you know, I get angry, probably more angry than I should, and point it out to them that no, there's no equivalency there. You people have no real grievance. You know, everything that you're talking about is based on lies. You know, Antifa was down there. I actually have a fellow in my fishing club who was down there at the protest, was outside the Capitol. And he said that, oh, there were lots and lots of Antifa. Well, yesterday morning, the FBI said that they'd investigated that and they found no evidence of Antifa. And his comment was that, well, they're just part of the deep state. I said, no, they're people who actually investigate things. This is what they do for a living. They actually know how to do that. I said, what you have is just hearsay, just making stuff up. So I told him, I said, I'm losing my patience. And don't expect me to be kind to you anymore when you talk like this. So
I hear you, Guy.
I had the same thing with my brother. I told my brother Antifa's it's a concept, it's a made up thing. Do you know anybody in Antifa? Do you know, it's another boogeyman for the right. You know, it's like the caravans coming across the border. It's made up, but you know, the people that we love are falling into these freaking rabbit holes and shit. You know, it's like, how can we drag them out?
Yeah, and I hear, you know, when Guy was saying, you know, he's lost patience, and you know, and I too wonder, you know, where do we go? You know, individually as a community, where do we go in, you know, as we move through this? Do we do as Guy said? You know, he's calling them out. He's not being kind anymore. He's, you know, he's using his voice, his words. Do we retreat? Do we, you know, I don't know. There's points where I want to just retreat. You know, but then there's I know that's not the route to bring change. Retreating is never going to bring change. So yeah, I'm feeling this turmoil. Amir.
Yeah, I just kind of want to respond to what like Guy said and Rick. I mean, I really struggle with this because I kind of feel like part of the you know, acting on the principles of the ethical society is to engage in dialogue. And in a way, I sort of feel like, Guy, you're on the front lines of communication. I kind of envy you on the one hand. Like I feel too like isolated from a lot of ultra right wing to even be able to have those dialogues. And in a way, to me, that's scarier. Because, you know, you can always imagine that the people are more extremist than maybe they really are. But it's also scary to me what you're saying, you know, and I get it. I totally get it. Like that at some point, like people cross the line, and how do you keep having a dialogue if people are being unreasonable, and what's unreasonable? So again, not that I feel like I have an answer, but yeah, I just feel like there's got to be a way to just have that conversation. I guess I would push back a little bit against the idea of no grievance. I mean, I think I don't know. I feel like that's part of the problem of the left is that, you know, yes, Black Lives Matter have very strong and legitimate grievances, you know, historical going way back. Um, and I don't know, again, I'm not, I don't want to like try to draw any kind of moral equivalency here, but, you know, but separately from that, I feel like, a lot of these people who are aligning with Trump, you know, do have some grievances, like economic grievances, perhaps that aren't being addressed by our leaders, by our country, and I think part of the problem is they're turning to these extremist leaders and points of view because nobody else is really speaking to them. And you know, I read like the popular like local media and everything to try to see who's kind of answering the call of like, you know, businesses shutting down and like speaking to people about businesses going overseas and things like that. And I feel like I don't know, you know, like I feel like the typical sort of left-wing response to that is, oh, well, if you guys just understood economics better, like you'd understand that this is ultimately better for all of us. So just, you know, trust us experts, like globalization and like closing the factories and everything is great for you, America, and like just, you know, shut up and deal with it. Like I feel like that's what, you know, a lot of people have probably been hearing from our leaders, and now we're also suffering a little bit the backlash of liberal sort of neglect of you know, rural American towns and people who are struggling to make a living. So I feel like part of the grievances is that, and maybe that's something that needs to be part of the dialogue that maybe we need to be open to, even if it doesn't justify, you know, like obviously it does just justify at the end of the day this sort of violence and insurrection and abominable behavior. But yeah, I don't know. Sorry, it's just like the thoughts that I struggle with all the time. And
Yeah, thank you, Amir. Thank you.
oh,
I
like,
can, yes,
one
go
other
ahead.
thing. Sorry. So one maybe sort of concrete thing that occurred to me, but probably just pie in the sky is like, I almost feel like we need a truth and reconciliation committee or efforts in our country. Like I so wish we had something where you could just bring people together in like town halls or something and really like try to have some sort of peaceful dialogue, like coming together around these things to address some of these issues so that they aren't just, you know, isolated conversations between Guy and his buddies and, you know, Rick and others. Like this needs to be a more global effort, I feel.
Yes, Amir. Wow. Would
Yeah,
that
I mean, I'll jump in. You know, my reactions and thoughts are really lining up with what you said, and just how do we show empathy and continue to show kindness to people who think very differently than we do, and what level of understanding do we need to achieve about where they're coming from in order to be able to do that? I think there's just some deep misunderstanding that we all have for each other, that if we could have these forums with open dialogue, true dialogue in a meaningful and kind way, that would be very healing, and it would also help us move forward.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for sharing that. Certainly something that intentional community and SVES you know, can work upon. Maybe there's things that we can do. Scott.
Yeah, I think Amir, you're right that the one legitimate grievance that I think there is definitely an economic one. There has been a poverty issue, a generational poverty issue that hasn't been, I think, fully dealt with, that I'm not sure the liberal side necessarily gets, or the neoliberal kind of gets. I think once you move a little bit beyond even more left of a liberal, I think there is some understanding of that poverty issue and what could be best be done to answer that. I think it highlights, though, the danger of a populist message, especially the Trump populism, which is also has the underpinnings of racism, misogyny, and really at the heart of it is fear. I had posted on my Facebook an article that looks at what they looked at the theory of risk and risk assessment, and how white males have a different view of risk than any other group. We tend to perceive risk a lot less than other groups. Except what they're seeing now, though, is they're seeing that their identity is being attacked, and they see their position in society being attacked as others are being elevated. So there's a false sense that their influence is being diminished by raising other influences up, or other people up. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. For the longest time, the white male has been, and arguably still is, the privileged position. But when you've got other voices trying to have a part of the space, they're seeing that their space is being taken away. So then you've got the insurrection that happened on Wednesday, because they see Trump as championing for themselves. And so I wrestle with, yes, I want to show empathy and compassion, but I also don't want to necessarily give credence to some of their arguments, or give them a pass on the underlining racism and misogyny that is usually filled in a lot of their spaces. And I think that has to be confronted, maybe person to person, and risk alienating some relationships, but just not being able to tolerate some of that underpinning racism, again, misogyny that's there.
Scott. Nancy, unmute yourself. You're still muted, honey.
I got it.
There you are.
I got it. I agree with what has just been said. Black Lives Matter has got a grievance that's so old and so obvious. It goes without saying. But the economic issue with whites is a legitimate one. And also, white supremacy is going to die an ugly, nasty, prolonged death. When you threaten folks that are totally enjoying their esteemed position, not to pick on any white males here, but those that have turned white supremacy into their own personal religion, are not going to go quietly into the night. But something that I wanted to get to, it has to do with fear and has to do with coming together. I have a cousin that I'm very close to. I have no sister. I only have had one brother who is sadly no longer with us. But I'm very close to this particular cousin. And she is a Republican, and she is a Trump supporter. And she and her brother is an Air Force veteran, once again, Trump supporter. Not to the degree that you saw on Wednesday in Washington, but I know that Mary Lou feels that there was wholesale over the years of Trump years of selective reporting and negative reporting regarding Mr. Trump. And she's very fearful about violence in general in our society, and points to all the death and destruction in the Black Lives Matter protests. And she's also appalled about what happened in Washington, D.C. This person, who is a very gentle soul, has bought a gun. She has a gun in her condo. I don't know how she ever thinks she's going to be able to appropriately use it, but she felt she needed a gun because of her proximity to Trenton, New Jersey. And I don't know, she felt that the Black Lives Matter protests were going to end up on her back door. I don't know. But she is functioning on an idea, a belief that violence, she's surrounded by violence and she needs to protect herself, and that censorship and violence are running amok in the land. And how will she ever feel secure again? And she put a post on Facebook about this yesterday, which I did not address. I thought, I don't want to talk to her on Facebook. At some point, we'll have to have a conversation. But how do you, once again, this goes back to how do you have these conversations? She believes what she believes. And I care for her. I can't just check the box that I'm going to write her off. And so it's a very complex situation we're in here. And how do we move carefully forward? Okay, that's my piece.
Thank you, Nancy.
If I may add,
Yes,
Amir.
Amir.
I think one issue is like what, yeah, I mean, again, I'm just sort of overwhelmed by the enormity of what it would take to fix this, but it's like some agreement on basic truths, you know? Like, I think we've polarized so much in this country to the extent that, you know, like what people are willing and able to believe, and I almost feel like we have to snap back from that and at least agree on some facts or some sources of truth or something that, like, because yeah, how do you argue with people like that? Like show that Black Lives Matter, like where did they get these ideas? Like there's no violence against, you know, people that like people concerned about their personal property. Like look at the statistics, you know, of and with the election fraud too, like, you know, like I said, where's the evidence of this? Like, it's almost like you need to be able to bring people around something that we can agree is indisputable facts, if there's even an opportunity for that anymore, you know, given right-wing distrust of even, you know, quote, mainstream media as being sources of truth. And yeah, it just really disturbs me, but I feel like that's what it would take, you know, to try to like say, okay, wait, you know, you've got these positions, but show me like where the data that you're basing this on, and can we both like agree that there is some source here, you know, like some neutral media source or something that we can agree represents reality, because I think, I mean, and that I think is part and parcel of what we're supposed to be about too as ethical societies, is we're, you know, science and trusting like some objective reality.
Yeah.
I just have a quick question, Amir, and for everybody. So a very important point you brought up. If you were going to go to a neutral, trustworthy news source, who would you pick? What would you point to as, because there's always following the money. Who owns the news outlet that's pulling the strings in the background to put a message out there or to withhold information? So it's hard to point to news organizations that you can, across the board, trust them with what they're putting out there. What does anybody have to say about that? I guess the question here is, who do you trust?
I had a conversation with my sister yesterday about this sort of thing, and I basically, my position was a legitimate news source. Every organization is going to make. I listed the ones that I listened to, and she didn't reciprocate with the ones that she listens to, because I'm sure they're Fox News and other right-wing sources of misinformation. But my point was that, yes, okay, so the New York Times or Washington Post or NPR might make a mistake. I mean, everyone does. But if it's a legitimate organization, they'll print a retraction. And I've never heard these right-wing organizations retract what they've said or retract in print. And they're not organizations, they're not journalists, and that's why they can say what they can say. They're not getting sued for most that I know of for libel or whatever. But I think one sign of a legitimate organization is that when a mistake occurs, that a retraction follows. But otherwise, it's, I think at some level, society exists because there's some level of trust that the organizations that we're listening to, or the judicial system, or the politicians are following their code of ethics, or what we've entrusted them to do. There's no possible way we can investigate what happened in Chicago over the summer with some of these things. Personally, I'm not on a list. I'm not on a list where they're going to inform me the stages of the investigation. And my sister's like, well, we need to know more about what happened, blah, 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 blah. At a certain level, as a society, we have to trust that the organizations we entrust with protecting us and looking out for our interests are actually doing their jobs. And I think that basic level of trust is completely been wiped out over the last 4 years, pretty effectively, with these aspersions on legitimate organizations and judges. I mean, this has happened from the very beginning with the Latino judge. I forget where he was, in Arizona, who was looking into something about Trump. And now you see everyone's political affiliation, like this is a Republican judge appointee or an Obama appointee. I mean, I don't think that ever used to happen, where people would say, well, what is that judge's political affiliation and who appointed that judge? I mean, I don't ever remember that happening, but that's, I think, a level of the politicization. But just getting back to my point, that there has to be some kind of baseline of trust in these organizations. Otherwise, I don't see how we can possibly have a conversation. I really don't. We don't have anything that we're agreeing on. We don't agree about what the Constitution means. We don't agree about anything. So how can we reach out to people? It just, to me, is impossible. I don't see a way out of that. The only way out, I think, is if justice is served. In other words, if the people who are breaking it, like the voting machine company, that's like, if they go after that lawyer, which apparently they're suing her, who's said, cast aspersions on what they've done. If there's legal action, if there are repercussions as far as what Trump has done and said, if he faces some consequences, if there are consequences for the enablers and the people who are just, if there are no consequences, I don't think the society can just put it behind us, as Lindsey Graham wants us to do, and just move on for the sake of not riling things up. I think we're long past that. The only thing that I think is where truth is possible to come out is if there's some kind of legal repercussions, and we're basing our sense of truth on the justice system, which of course is imperfect, but it's really kind of the last bastion of what we have here. So that's what I have to say.
Jesse? Oh, sorry. Jay.
No, Jesse, go ahead.
Okay, Jesse?
Am I
Yeah,
muted?
you're muted.
Oh, so two things. First, I fully agree that news bias and lying egregiously to people, as well as the political leaders lying through the media to people, is a huge problem that needs to be addressed. And then I think underlying a lot of this fighting is, like somebody said, fear. So if we're really going to dig down to the root of our problem here, and I think the implicit bias movement kind of is a step in that direction, at least. Why are people afraid of each other? And specifically, why are white people afraid of Black people? Why are men afraid of women gaining power? I think that it's a lizard brain reaction to the sense that in order for a minority group or the oppressed group to become equal with the group in power, that it necessitates the group in power giving up some of their power. And that creates this knee-jerk fear, I must protect myself mentality, when the reality isn't that. Nobody's going after anybody with pitchforks. Well, they kind of are now, the white supremacists, but they're being defensive over something that isn't happening. But what is happening is people are demanding justice that they deserve and treatment that they deserve as equals, and that threatens people. So how do we address that? I don't know what the solution is. And I think, like I mentioned, implicit bias is starting to poke holes and show people that they need to be aware of the problem first. That's the first step, right? So the more people that come to terms with their primal, whatever it is that's creating these feelings, I think is possibly a first step. So on a local level, perhaps holding these types of conversations and educational opportunities about recognizing our own. I think Phyllis said last week that she hasn't had the opportunity to confront her own, and I'm not going to put words in her mouth, but I think that her sentiment is really shared with a lot of people, that, like, where do you go to talk about this stuff? Especially if all the people around you look like you. That's all.
I think there's also a level of perhaps embarrassment for those that have, especially for those that have hitched their ride to Trump, maybe from not necessarily buying into the racism and the misogyny, the folks that say, well, I don't like what he says, but, or how he acts. But, they're typically, they've been a lifelong Republican, or I think maybe there's this lack of embarrassment that they don't want to maybe admit that they were wrong, or that they don't want to admit that he was wrong or where we're at. Especially if we look to our politicians, so many of them that kind of join the bandwagon what amazed me, it seems like they abandoned their principles in part because they wanted to maintain power. I think there was a fear that, well, if they don't keep following Trump, then when it comes time for their reelection, they're going to get primaried by somebody even more extreme. So they needed to kind of hold their power. Now, all of a sudden, we're seeing all these people resigning, which I personally don't feel that should be applauded, because it's way too late for all of that. They enabled him for 4 years. If they really had principles, they should have resigned a long time ago, rather than just now. Oh, after this insurrection, let's resign now and say how terrible it was. Well, you allowed it to happen. I mean, I don't think they can just wash their hands of it, with a quick resignation.
Oops, I think Scott locked up on us. I think while Scott's working on that, we'll go to Jay. I know Jay has.
Yeah,
waited to speak.
I'm hearing a lot of different things, and I'm sitting with a lot of different things. And one of the things, a few of the things that come up to me is I really appreciate Nancy's story, and I really appreciate Guy's story. And I often think about my first 2 years at Ohio University, being one who is from the Northeast, going to the heartland. And I think about the fact that I entered into a space where the campus is very, of course, quote, by appearance diverse. And I had just entered into this same year that students, the administration had decided to revamp free speech on campus. And any speech at Ohio is basically welcome. Can imagine what I'm saying. And so, yes, I started having students most of my students at my first 2 years were Trump supporters. They were not only Trump supporters, they also expressed that they were white supremacists. They were neo-Nazis. And I mean, I've literally had students say to me that they took my class because it was the only last name that they could pronounce. I teach a class on what is called art in context. And so we look at various formations of art, from the feminist movement all the way to queer theory, to that of, Black, Hispanic, you name it, I'm going in. And I have had students ask me multiple times, why does this even matter? Why do we need to know about this kind of movement? And, this is nothing but socialist talk. And so the story and narrative is perpetuated even in undergraduate, because they come from families that still perpetuate this narrative. Some of my students are working and going to school at the same time so they can take care of their household, or maybe take care of that farm. And I don't mean to make it a long story, but it was a real cultural phenomenon for me. It was a cultural phenomenon because the real thing is that I knew I came with an equipment around being one locked in the ivory tower, being one who enjoys learning and had to fall in love with learning. I've been one to do that. And, to even begin to have a conversation around privilege, and seemed unreal in a space like that. And so when I'm hearing, you know, one of the things that I know as just being an educator is that there's a space where people make up in their mind, I won't learn from you. They wake up in their mind and they say, I will not learn from you. And when you get that, it's your job as someone who is called to teach or educate to get to the heart of the lesson, which is what I've called it for years. And I began to share, and I was actually talking about this a bit with Patty just a day ago, because most of my students didn't realize that I had connection with you know, my great-great-grandfather being a sharecropper, and that he was in the Civil War, and he was not a Union soldier, he was a Confederate. And so, of course, that brings up some conversation. Because what does this brown face know about the Confederacy? Well, I know plenty. And part of my life, I grew up in Richmond, Virginia. I know all about Monument Avenue and Robert E. Lee. I know more about Monument Avenue and Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson because of my education in Richmond, Virginia. I know that our Virginia Arts Museum is all about the Confederacy. Let me tell you something. You wanna break into a world, it's a world. I did not even know that there was a Dr. King Day until I was 13, because we celebrated Lee Jackson King Day, where Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson were placed on the same holiday as Dr. King. I grew up disliking myself as being brown and also having kinky hair, and wanted my hair to be straight because my friends were all white. The complex is real. And I can imagine the complexity that many of you probably are going through, and I hear the concern, but I will say we have to get to the heart of the lesson. The heart of the lesson is, what can I learn from you? We can use words like misogyny and patriarchy and hegemony and all these fancy words because we are reading, but how do you talk to someone who's just down home? It didn't matter how many times I taught about feminist theory or anything. I needed to get to the heart of the matter. And I think that when I hear Guy talking, when I hear Nancy talking, I am hearing these individuals speak from a place in which they care. People do not care what you know. They want to know that you care. And so, you know, we have to do better as liberal progressives to stretch our conversation. We have to, as much as, you know, Brian hates this word, but this was a phrase that I grew up with, which I would say, go get your cousins. You got to have conversations with those cousins that honestly you have moved away from, because they are a part of this larger community that we live in. They are a part of the global context. They are a part of all of it. And it will make, and we have to lean into our discomfort. And the reason why we keep falling into this space where we want to have people that agree with us, I mean, it's social media mostly, because we can pick and choose our friends. We can choose who we want to cancel. I don't get that when I'm in a classroom. So all of those people and all those young kids, whether they heart me or whatever for the day, or put a thumbs up, some of them like my page, some of them like the things that I say, because they had to make other connections with me, and I had to allow for myself to be vulnerable even in my discomfort. Trust me, I've been called outside my name multiple times by students, but it didn't stop me from being like, hey, you know, I mean, I literally had students also did not understand how to use the context of, you know, people of color. They'd be like, you mean colored people? No, honey, I mean people love color. They'd be like, colored people. And I said, and I you know, I kind of was like, why is color past tense? I'm still a person of color. My color still exists. And they would say, oh, now that I think about it, yes, huh. I was like, try it. And I started grading papers that were being transformed from saying, you know, colored people to people of color. That was, I took that as a growth. You know, I took that as a growth because I was like, if I don't get that, heck, I mean, you start talking about, you know, queer community, and then you're like reaching into another space, and it's like all of these different conversations. I think we do have to have those courageous conversations, but we have to also be courageous listeners. And when I saw what I saw regarding our nation's capital, you know, I was glad to hear a news reporter bring it back up, which was the statement by Malcolm X, you know, that the chickens were coming home to roost. It was truly that. And for me, and I just said, wow, said how those words live again. And you're absolutely right, Nancy. White supremacy will destroy itself. And if we are not mindful, we will find ourselves in another form of white supremacy. And it will be elitist, and it will be highly educated, and it will be highly economically high, like, you know, high economical classes, right? It won't stop until we decide to have those tough conversations and not look at someone from the space of you're beneath me or you're above me. I can constantly keep doing that if I want to. I agree. I have every right, possibly so, from all of the years of systemic oppression and structural oppression in this country. But I know I have to be in a bigger conversation. And I choose an ethic in which I care about people and do my best to make sure that I arrive to a space in which I don't give people, you know, what I care for them to know. I want them to know that I care.
Jay, that was really, you know, spot on with a lot of stuff that I've been thinking about, and just given the apparent major disconnect about what reality actually is. It's got to transcend the mind. It's got to go to the heart, and you have to really connect at that level. And that only happens one-on-one. And I think with people that you've got to build trust and demonstrate caring. And it's not about us and them, it's about we and what's the bigger thing that we're all after.
Yeah, I've tried that science thing. You know, I tried being science about it and thinking that people are going to think rational. Sometimes it's just, you got, because they feel, people feel, and we can't take that away, and people have a right to feel. So I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, I got to ask, is that your quote, Jay?
What?
Because I wrote that down. I love that people don't care what you know. They want to know that you care.
My grandmother used to say that.
Huh.
My grandmother used to say that. She would, because I was always talking about school, and she would always say, she said, people don't care what you know. They care to know that you care. And she was always just trying to bring me down to make sure that I never got, because I didn't grow up in an educated household. I'm the first in my family to go to college. And so everyone in my family is, you know, has admired how I've been in this ivory tower space. And you want to talk about switching from like imperial English to like King's English to being like, let's just have community. Like, it takes a lot of that, which has always been my, yeah, I would hate for y'all to see me in other spaces because then it gets really yah-yah for me. And I'm like,
But I really think you hit the nail on the head there. You know, there's this sort of concept of psychological ownership too, that I feel like people, yeah, in a way, I think that's what caring does for people, you know, is that that's part of the issue, is that people feel almost like disenfranchised of caring across different groups. And that's when they become so fearful and threatened and do crazy things like what happened.
Right. One of the things I think, you know, too, if I can add this, for if you find it significant, if we get to a place within our social structure that when we see things that are different from us, or people who are different from us, or different experiences, we don't objectify them, right? We don't turn them into these objectified things. And when I say that, like literally just think about an object and realize that that object also requires care. Every time you buy something, merchandise, whatever it is, your iPhone, your headphones, whatever it may be, even your clothing, inside, there is an instruction on care, how to take care of it, even if it's an object. And then it becomes your favorite sweater, or it becomes your favorite headset, or it becomes your favorite device. And you learn how to take care of it, and you also have an instruction manual on how to do something. I think that is a very key factor to how we can really begin to think about even how we care for each other, that we don't objectify each other so much that we don't realize that there's instructions of care that people are trying to tell us. We won't have things unravel in this country if we are willing to hear the care that is needed.
Yeah, Jay and Amir and everyone, you know, what has just been said, you know, resonates with me and resonates with just the fact that these Sunday times we're together are so important for me. And you know, and I don't want to say that, you know, and maybe this is a question, do we learn to care? Or is that, you know, are we born to care? I'm like, you know, if we don't, maybe we don't see ourselves as caring enough. You know, does this community we meet in Sundays throughout the week, in our communications on Facebook, in our emails, you know, are we providing the strength, the support to help each of us care deeply, to care more? Do you feel that it's something that we can do without having a community of support? Do you feel like you're okay on your own? You know, these are just things that, you know, I'm all over in my mind and my heart a lot. And I, you know, I think each of us are very, yeah, I think what has been said today resonates with all of us. And, you know, and I hope we have these conversations and this community moving forward to continue strengthening our care between ourselves and for those who are different from us. Yeah. Any other thoughts this morning? Amir.
Yeah, it's funny. Jesse was just saying, I think we're here because we care, but I also think we care because we're here. Like we're very. I think we're, as human beings, we really respond to context, and I have this sort of image in my mind of, you know, people when they're like, someone's about to get in a fight with someone else and like friends nearby, you know, or whoever, like kind of hold them back and they're like, you know, don't do it. Like, I feel that our group and hopefully other groups like it, like serve that kind of purpose. It's like we come in here, I mean, I'm angry too, you know, and I feel like there's part of me too that wants to lash out and just, you know, like call these just like, yeah, they're insurrectionists and they deserve to be punished, and, you know, like have these kind of thoughts. And it takes the community, I think, to pull us back and say like, hey, you know, and Jay saying like, you know, these people deserve, you know, people deserve care too, to keep us from dehumanizing others. That's what worries me. I think everyone's capable of acting in evil ways, of dehumanizing others. And we need more of these, I think, moderating type of influences to have us, you know, function as caring people.
Yes, thank you, Amir. Okay, let's do just some reflection here as we bring things to a close. I always hate when the time rolls around to do so, but hopefully you've given each of us, you know, some food for thought as we, you know, continue throughout the day and the week. But there's several things you might want to reflect on here and take just a short moment, you know, to share. What from this morning do you feel has been the most valuable or meaningful to you? And has there been anything that has changed your perception with this morning's talk? Nancy.
Briefly, the issue of caring, going back to my cousin, a dedicated Republican that thinks that censorship and violence is run amok in the land. I will emphasize the fact when we do talk that I care about her, and that starting from that basis, I think chips away at people's walls and encourages more communication.
Thank you, Nancy. Anyone else want to
Yeah.
share?
Jesse.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about when I said that, you know, when I first seen them storm it, you know, shoot them, shoot them, shoot them. But what this society has taught me is that I came back to think to fully understand is to fully, you know, care. Use the word care here. So there, you know, I still have those reactions, you know, those gut reactions, but then I step back and I think of it, you know, from the ethical viewpoint now. And it's really this society, I don't know how many years I've been in it now, it's really it changed the way I think of things and see things. And you know, because I'm down there in the trenches with the blue collar and shit, and I hear so many, but now it causes me to look and think. And you know, sometimes, you know, what's the one thing I like? I just quote from a song. If you're supposed to watch your mouth, I seriously doubt that your eyes would be above it sometimes. You know, but it causes me to think before I lash out, actually.
Thank you, Rick.
Jesse.
For me, the most valuable thing that I got out of this conversation is hearing your stories. Sorry, your personal stories, because that's where, like we were saying, that's where the work is. It's in those interactions. And like Amir said, we don't often get to have those interactions. We probably should try harder to put ourselves in the position to do so. Hearing your experience, and Jay, your story about Ohio and just the different perspectives on it is helping me build my understanding and deepen it. on a real level. So I just want to thank you for sharing all of that.
Thank you, Jess. Okay. Okay. And I want to thank everybody this morning. And I agree. The sharing of stories and the fact that we have this moment, at least, once a week, to be together and care deeply, not just for the community we have built, but the community around us and beyond. So I'm going to close with some words that, again, that John Paul had in the share that I read at the start of the program. Remember these words: we cannot walk alone. Act on and walk into what you know to be true. Start local, and as we say, reach out beyond your comfort zone. Walk together. In this, the stone of hope is hewn. And again, thank you all, and hope to see you next Sunday. Jay will be doing our program for us on Sunday. Looking forward to it. Also, do remember, our new email outlet that we have. And if you're not receiving emails from this new group, it's called groups.io. And I think you'll, and if that's not coming through to your email inbox, then, I think you have to put it into your contact list. I think that's how it works. I don't know the internet so well, but, and yeah, Marcus, don't laugh at me, Rachel, my daughter. But Marcus, I will send that to you in your email, and maybe that will hopefully resolve, that you're not getting things. Okay. Hey, everyone, go out, have a good day, have a good week, and we'll talk again soon. Bye. Love you all.
How's it doing?